to order. Thank you for joining us today for the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. We are glad to be back in action for fiscal year 25. We are expecting an additional member to join us any moment now, and thank you for your patience as we gave a little bit of grace for folks to cross the street. We do need to excuse absent members, and without objection, absent members are excused. Mr. Scott, would you call attendance, please?
Chair Hood.
Present.
Representative McKinney. Representative Brayback.
Here.
Representative Weiss. Representative Martis.
Here.
Representative Beeson.
Here.
Representative Cabot.
Here.
Representative Schutte.
Here.
Madam Chair, there are 7 members present and 1 member excused.
Thank you. Representative Brayback has shared a motion to approve minutes from the previous meeting from April 19th of 2023.
Yes.
So moved. Any opposition? With that, we'll approve the minutes. And now I am quite delighted to introduce our Eagle Director, Phil Roos, and his team to provide an overview of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy fiscal year 23-24 executive budget. Actually, that's incorrect. It's the fiscal year 25 executive budget. Little typo there in the agenda.
Thank you,
you.
Madam Chair, committee members. Am I close enough? There we go. Pleasure to be here, honored to be here with all of you. And I'm Phil Roos, been on this job about 7 months and really excited to be here with you. I'm accompanied by Deputy Director Travis Bouskill, and we're ready to get started. So I think it's helpful to ground this discussion and all the work we do in a way we do at Eagle every day, which is to remember who we're serving, the 10 million residents of Michigan. With the work that we do as an agency, we have the responsibility and the honor to actually be at the heart of their basic health, their livelihood, and their way of life every day, and we keep that in mind in everything we do. We think about what connects us to those 10 million Michiganders. It's something we all care about that supports all of what I just said. And that is the amazing natural resources of the state. As you know, we're the 11th largest state. We have 4 of the 5 Great Lakes and Lake St. Clair, 11,000 inland lakes, 76,000 river and stream miles, 6.5 million acres of wetlands, 230,000 acres of coastal dunes, over 3,000 linear miles of freshline coastline, more than any other state, and 62 million acres of land. And we're determined to protect those on behalf of Michiganders. Eagle is made up of 1,450 employees as it stands right now. And one of the first things that I was struck with when I took this job was the depth of dedication of pretty much everybody I met within the agency in terms of why they were there, and it's really about the mission that you see right up here, which is to protect Michigan's environment and public health by managing air, water, land, and energy resources. We do that through conducting inspections, cleaning up contaminated sites, analyzing samples, providing technical assistance, reviewing and issuing permits. That's a big part of the job, but also providing grants and loans to communities that plays a key role in their development and their ability to thrive. We impact them every single day through assuring air quality, clean drinking water, probably nothing more important than that we do, and ensuring proper disposal of waste and hazardous materials. I'm honored and excited to be able to share with you the highlights of the governor's executive budget recommendation for Eagle. And if we step back, those who were present, or I'm sure you're well familiar with, there were 6 major headlines in terms of the priorities in the governor's budget, and they're listed there. I'm happy to say that there is very strong alignment between that and the priorities of Eagle, and I'll share more about that in a minute. But I would just say, looking at those 6 priorities, we touch all of those in one way or another, but particularly keeping Michigan healthy, that's sort of fundamental to what we do. Make it in Michigan. While we are a regulatory and environmental protection agency, we also play a pretty fundamental role in helping to support responsible economic development and community development, and that's what Make It in Michigan is all about. Lowering costs by being as efficient as we can and providing great service, and fair, equitable Michigan, that's pretty fundamental to everything we do, making sure that the protection we provide happens for all communities and all 10 million Michiganders. I want to share with you something we've been working on a lot here in the last few months, and it's really an articulation of our ambition for Eagle. What was clear to me as I walked in and had early discussions with folks on the team is that there was a real opportunity to build on the great work of the agency, but to aspire to even more, to take it to another level. And we needed a time-bound vision that would guide us in doing that. We have a long-term vision that is about, making the world wonderful and clean lakes and rivers and all of that. But what are we going to do in the next 3 years? And so we call this Vision 2027. And the overall vision is to make Michigan a truly enduring national leader in environmental protection, to raise the bar in terms of the level of protection that we can provide our residents, but at the same time to recognize that we do play this important role in helping to support responsible economic development. So we're going to be easier to deal with. We're going to work hard to streamline processes that we have so that we can serve the regulated community, all stakeholders, people in communities where regulated facilities exist. And another part of that is community development and growth. More than half of our budget goes out the door in grants and loans. And in the visits that I've done around the state to see some of the work that the agencies had a role in, it's clear a lot of times those are game-changing investments, and we're going to really lean into that. So there are 3, these are sort of the externally facing elements of the vision. We're also doing some things internally to make it a wonderful place to work and to raise as much federal grant money as we can. But there are 3 areas here to highlight. Impact. We've taken all of the program areas that we work on, air, land, water, hazardous waste, all of those. And we're developing stretch impact objectives. So we're trying to measure success for ourselves by the actual impact that we're having on people's lives. Service also, and that's where I would put economic development support as well as community development support. We've got stretch objectives for how we're going to do that as well that we're working on. And then finally, we're going to double down on engagement and communication so that we're easy to work with, we're transparent, and we're moving things in a really better direction and trying to take the whole operation to another next level. When we think about the governor's executive budget recommendation, what I'm really happy to say is that there are 4 big priority areas that are among our really top priorities that are reflected in a meaningful way in that budget. 3 of those fall into that program area impact area, and then there's one about responsible development. So I'll just tick through them really quickly here. Drinking water and water infrastructure. This is, this has been a big priority, a big commitment that you all have made and the federal government has made to try to replace lead service lines and also just to be able to ensure every community has safe, affordable drinking water. And so there's some funding in there for lead service lines and associated drinking water infrastructure, and it's really meant to enable us to be sure that we can draw down all the federal money that's out there. There's some of it we could not access because the money is for lead service lines, not necessarily for the other things that the communities want to do when they're putting in lead service lines. And then there's some FTEs in there to cover the basic regulatory role in all of its functions around drinking water. Contaminated sites and waste management. The central element of that, an enabling element, is a recommendation for an increase in the tipping fee for landfills that would bring us closer to the Midwest average of about $5 per ton. And that would raise $80 million in funds, and that would fund a variety of cleanup of contaminated sites, orphan sites, brownfield redevelopment grants, loans to facilitate responsible reuse, recycling, hazardous waste inspections, and a wide range of other things. This is really a challenge that it was pretty clear to me walking in that while we've made pretty substantial progress on it, which I can report if we talk about that afterwards, but it's a big hill still to climb. We have 24,000 contaminated sites out there that need our attention. And there's some staff capacity to do all of that. Climate and energy, all of this is in service of the governor's goals of 100% carbon neutral economy by 2050 and the pathway that was laid out via the My Healthy Climate Plan. So there are a number of elements in that that are in the recommendation here. Funding for grants and municipalities for green infrastructure to manage stormwater, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, funding for transitioning Michigan's fleets to emission-free fuel sources, and a bit of funding for hydrogen stations for heavy-duty vehicles, because we need to be thinking about what's next on the horizon. And then finally, the fourth area is not a program area, but it's across everything that we do, is support responsible economic development and growth. And in the last budget, we're very thankful, I'm thankful as the recipient, somebody walking into this job, the extra staffing for the permitting function in particular, and with some flexibility. That's starting to really kick in, make a big difference. There are a number of other things that we're doing on permitting to streamline the process, but there are still some modest gaps there that we're trying to fill that go beyond even the core permitting function, but to the engagement that's required with regulated parties, with community members, with stakeholders that surround the permitting process. So that's what that's about. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that all the water infrastructure work, as well as the brownfield redevelopment, all the cleanup work, has a pretty fundamental impact on community development. And so in the other items I talked about, there's really a big community development impact. So I want to give the overview of the budget recommendation. These are the numbers overall. I'm really excited about them. The total Eagle budget, what we're recommending is $1.1 billion. It was about $1 billion last year. That's still a drop in the bucket in the total state budget, about 1%. We like to think that we have an outside positive impact given all the different elements of people's lives that we touch and how important our role is in doing that. And just a little bit more context, if you look at funding by source, 42% federal, 36% state restricted, 14% general fund ongoing, and 8% one-time. If you look at those numbers together, 94% of our budget is restricted. It's a little different from a lot of agencies, and it speaks to some challenges for us, but also a lot of money's out there, and we know it's going to the right purposes, so that's the upside of it. And this budget that we're looking at here would continue to build on some really critical investments that happened in recent budgets, and thank all of those of you who supported that in the past year. It was nice to inherit some positive things that we've been able to build on around infrastructure support, climate change and resiliency, and staffing, and other elements. Okay, so I'm going to go through those 4 priorities in a bit more detail. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. The first budget priority, protecting drinking water and water infrastructure, that should say. So there's 35 million one-time and 5 million ongoing that would go to drinking water infrastructure, again, to leverage federal dollars. There's lead service line replacement, we're going to be called upon by the lead and copper rule. The improved lead and copper rule is going to accelerate the schedule for lead service line replacement. So the challenge is big, and we're going to have a federal mandate to achieve that. So this is keeping the momentum going by allocating some money that will allow us to draw down every single dollar out there that we can in terms of federal lead service lines. That's what a lot of what we're trying to do, is leverage federal money everywhere we can throughout the budget. There's also the bipartisan infrastructure law called for 4 years. I think we're in year 3 of $250 million a year for various kinds of water infrastructure, wastewater treatment, stormwater, drinking water as well. And we are expecting another $25 million of that to come through this year, and so we're recognizing that in the budget. There's an addition of 16 FTEs recommended within the drinking water department because we've been charged with assessing that we have the adequate staffing and the capacity to be able to comply in an ongoing way with the Safe Water Drinking Act, particularly as the levels of allowable lead in the water, if there should be any lead in the water, those are going to be stricter going forward here in a couple years. And we're going to need this to just maintain our ability to stay on top of things in that area. And then there are 3 FTEs to help with setting up ongoing implementation of the Healthy Hydration Plan, which recently passed. Next priority, contaminated site cleanup and waste. So the centerpiece of this, or the funding mechanism of this, is a proposed increase to $5 per ton, up from 36 cents a ton in the tipping fee. That would get us up to close to the state's average among the Midwestern states. So it's not like we're going way out on a limb here, but it's to have a level playing field, so we're all working against the same numbers. And that would have a couple impacts. One is we want to remove the big incentive for folks in other states and the Canadian provinces to dump their trash in our landfills. And we think that's really important. It's important to the people of the state of Michigan. It's important. There's a cost to that happening that we're ultimately paying for one way or another, odors, whatever else, potential contamination. We have, as I said, more than 24,000 contaminated sites out there. It's an overwhelming number. This would go a long ways to helping us make a dent in that. We've made a lot of progress in the last couple years. A couple years back, we were doing about 350 sites a year. We're up to 750 this year, based on the funding that came in this last budget, more than double. And what we're seeing from this is that there's an opportunity here. We've had to focus on the very biggest contaminated sites, the ones that are at the most immediate risk. And we've done a lot of work in prioritizing the sites so that we can make those determinations with limited dollars. What we're looking for as an opportunity is to make a dent in the next level of sites. Those that are the highest risk take the most time. And with a little bit more funding and resources to make this happen, I think we can start to break into a whole other tier that can be done more quickly. And I think we can really start to make a dent in those numbers. So there's also waste oversight with 36 FTEs to do that. It falls into 3 different areas that are part of this proposal. Solid waste and materials management facility oversight, 21 FTEs. Hazardous waste generator inspections, this is really a critical thing, 7 FTEs. And then beefing up our enforcement teams with distinct hazardous and solid waste teams. I think that's on our minds a lot, that risk of contamination from hazardous sites. We see examples of that around the country, even in our state. And that's an important thing, that having people in the facilities and enforcement action is really key to that. There's also 15 FTEs for contaminated sites and 4 FTEs for the MUSTA underground storage tank sites to clean up releases from those tanks. Next area, climate and energy. Obviously, a big priority for the governor with the implementation of the My Healthy Climate Plan, the energy legislation that passed in the last session. These are some areas that haven't been addressed to date, and there's some meaningful impact that can come from each of these. The first area, and it sort of crosses over to drinking water and water infrastructure, is climate change resiliency through green infrastructure. This is stormwater diversion infrastructure, things like rain gardens and buffer strips to get that program. That doesn't fit neatly into the SRF program. It's hard to have dedicated funding for that. So this would be a grant program that would get us started in a big way against that. It's $10 million one time, $5.3 million ongoing, and 2 FTEs to support that. The second one is deploying clean fuel and charging infrastructure. That's a $25 million one-time general fund amount to install charging stations at multifamily complexes and commercial parking lots. And it'll just help us in that important step to build out the charging network for this evolving economy. And then finally, the My Clean Fleets. This is a $20 million one-time recommendation to provide grants to municipalities, transit authorities, and key infrastructure hubs. And this is about replacing medium to heavy-duty fleet vehicles with emission-free alternatives, whether it's battery EVs or starting to get into hydrogen fuel-based vehicles. There are a number of other energy and climate items that are in the supplemental that are listed here. Maybe I'll just touch on a couple of them. These are, I think in all cases, these are federal programs. Am I right about that? Yeah. Federal programs that we're just reflecting in the budget. Probably the biggest item there, the hydrogen stations for heavy vehicles. This is a 10.5-year project to create these fuel stations, and it's enabled by the Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub grant that we were awarded, or the designation we were awarded through the MOC H2 Hub. And this, just to make up the $30 million and change, is $22 million and change is federal. And so the remainder, which is about $8 million, would come from the Michigan Competitiveness Fund, the Make It in Michigan Competitiveness Fund. So no money out the door than other state money on that. Methane emissions reduction program, that's to plug marginal conventional wells. This is a big component of carbon emissions that can be addressed if we have the resources. $5 million to work on that, and it's really, there's a lot of money in there for studying and providing measurements to determine how to prioritize well plugging and support elements of environmental restoration of wells. Underground injection control for Class 6 wells, $2 million. That's to develop and implement Class 6 well programs and apply for primacy. So ensures groundwater resources are protected while supporting geologic sequestration of carbon dioxide to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change. Clean diesel program, $693,000, and then the Rural Energy for America program, $363 million. And then finally, in the area of the fourth of those priorities I showed you at the beginning was about supporting communities and responsible development. I mentioned that the permitting related FTEs, we're still hiring a lot of those people, though we've made significant progress on that just in the last 3 or 4 months since this fiscal year began, and we could start that. But we're clear that there are still some gaps, and they're kind of on the edges of permitting. You've got people who are concentrating on the technical elements and reviewing all the documents and the science and the regulations, but there's a pretty enormous engagement and outreach element to this. That I think at times probably we haven't been able to do that in the way we'd like to be able to do it. And I think that's important to the regulated community, but also other stakeholders. And so we're asking for 10 FTEs spread across some of the divisions to help with that. And as I said, this has the heading here is community development and economic development. And I already covered these, but infrastructure funding for drinking water, stormwater mitigation, as well as contaminated sites and brownfield real development. Those are going to have a really big, important impact on community development and in many cases on economic development. So to look at where we are, and I think this showed up maybe in last year's budget presentation, but just as the long arc, and I don't think we have good numbers prior to this. I've heard even bigger numbers for what the original, long ago FTE numbers were. And that went down to from 1,700 on this chart to about a little, was it 1,200 when the governor took over, something in that range. At the same time that that was happening, and even at the bottom of that curve, there were lots of things that were happening that were expanding the scope of what Eagle was responsible for. Probably one of the biggest areas is federal funding, just the billions of dollars that we not only have to review applications and decide what to do, but we have to do compliance and lots of other things on it. It's quite involved. And just to give you an idea how the scope of that has changed, in 2017, we funded in the water infrastructure area $190 million in projects, and last year we funded $1.8 billion in projects. I don't remember what the project count on that, but it's big. And those are complex projects to evaluate, to get them started, to make sure all of our compliance is done on it. That alone is a major increase of scope, and I'm sure my folks from the finance team, who are a number of them who are in the crowd here, understand that, but also in the program areas that's happening in the drinking water and water resources. We had a number of new and expanding programs. We just talked about Filter First as like a new program that's an example. There are probably 20 of them over the last several years. Increased premium on compliance and service. I gave the example of the lead service line replacement, and the lead and copper rule is going to actually raise the bar on that even further in the drinking water area. Climate plan implementation, that wasn't even around 5 years ago, and that's now, there's a big mandate on that. There's a lot of federal money that we're raising that will come into the coffers of the state and be able to fund that effort. Emerging contaminants, we didn't even know about PFAS 10 years ago, or maybe around that period of time. And here we are, we have 300 people within our department who are working on PFAS in one way or another, on top of the other things that they're working on. And then environmental justice, which continues to be a really important element of what we do, and we are engaging with communities on issues, permitting decisions, other issues all the time. So we've made a lot of progress. We're getting up close to where we were at the same time that the scope of what the agency does has expanded pretty dramatically. I'll just flash this up here before the thank you slide, which is just, we don't need to go through any of these right now unless you want to. These are some of the somewhat smaller ticket items, though it's all real money. These are, I think in most cases, if not all, these are maybe not the one that I've highlighted at the bottom. These are federal money, federal programs that are, we're just reflecting in the budget. But an important area to mention, because it's important to the people who have these jobs and to the work that they're doing, is parity pay for Eagle's conservation officers. It's $384,000 in there. The Office of State Employer, the Civil Service Commission, recommended an adjustment to the DNR officers to address the difficulty in recruiting these folks. And Eagle also has 12 conservation officers, so this is just to bring them to parity with those folks and the hard work and important work that they do. And I think I'll stop there and be happy to take questions, but that's our overview of the budget. Excited to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Director. We appreciate you being here and for this great amount of insight and vision forward. Appreciate the time-bound goals that you're establishing in your first months in office, and we look forward to watching you achieve those and also just to understand them more in depth. We do have questions. I'll start with Representative Schuette.
Thank you, Chair Hood, and thank you, Director Roos, for that presentation. I would like to direct some questions towards tipping fees here. So you discussed in your presentation that the role of this increase would be to remove the incentive for out-of-state waste to dump in Michigan. So does that mean that you anticipate in-state residents, businesses, and school districts will be the ones who then bear the cost of this more than 1,000% increase?
Well, I think that it's important to look at the actual scale of the increase. What we're talking about is, if you assume for a minute that, well, I would say a couple things. First, I don't think it's going to eliminate out-of-state waste, but it's just putting it on a level playing field here. So there's not a disproportionate incentive for it to come to our state as opposed to other states. But then if you look at the scope of this, let's assume for a minute that every dollar of that fee, of that additional cost, were passed along to the average Michigander. The average American produces about 1,700 pounds per year of solid waste. That's about 3 to 4 tons. So if you translate that down, we're talking about $15 to $20 a year would be if all of that got passed along to those folks. What's that? For a family. For a family, sorry, yeah. And I think we have to also keep in mind just the benefits of this. Being able to have better control over the landfill waste that we do have, to make sure we have proper controls over it, to avoid odor issues, all the things that come with bringing more and more trash into the state.
Okay, so what is Michigan's landfill capacity compared to other states in the region? Do you know?
I don't. Do you know that? Yeah, we'll give you a follow up on that for sure.
I'd be curious to hear that. And then, 75% of this revenue from this more than 1,000% increase is going to go towards remediation effort. In last year's budget, $206 million of resources were directed towards remediation projects. What's the rate of closure on the funds that we already have dedicated towards remediation projects?
Rate of closure?
On site cleanups, like when you've initiated a site cleanup and then closed with the funds that you've been allocated.
I'd have to report back to you unless you have a.
I think the director got to it a little bit as well with where we've been forced to prioritize in the past, right? In terms of where's the biggest benefit to the public and the people of Michigan. So is it getting that site completely closed out? Well, to be honest, our statutory kind of setup doesn't really prioritize or necessarily allow that in terms of closing out the site. But he mentioned our focus on addressing those high-risk sites, mitigating those immediate risks at those sites so that we don't have public that are at harm, and then moving on to the next sites along. So is closure always the number one priority? Not necessarily. We're trying to focus on mitigating those risks and getting rid of potential harm.
Okay. Again, just one more question, and it's regarded to the Clean Fuels program, not on tipping fees. Do those funds, would those and proposals include ethanol as a clean fuel option or no?
The proposed legislation on
Yeah.
clean fuels? Mm-hmm. I haven't seen the latest version of that.
Okay.
I don't know if you.
So assuming you're talking about what's in the budget rather than
Yep.
some of the legislation
Yeah.
that's been
Mm-hmm.
proposed.
Yeah.
So it's aimed at hydrogen, EV, kind of low and zero emission fuel sources.
So not including ethanol. Okay. Thank you.
Representative Weiss?
Thank you, and thank you, Director, for your presentation. I just had a question on the match program for the federal lead line replacement funding. So it's $40 million, so the $5 million one time and the $35 million ongoing.
That's right.
Does that include the match funding from the federal side, or is that just the state side? And then there'd be an additional up to $40 million match from the federal side on top of that?
Why don't you answer that more precisely than I will?
Yeah, and I'm going to over elaborate on your question a little bit because I think this is kind of key to understand. So right now the state budget the Eagle budget in the current year fully allocates the match that we need at the state level to pull down the federal dollars from IIJA, that additional like $250 million a year, give or take. What we're talking about here with this proposal in the budget is there's a big portion of those federal dollars that are specific for lead service line replacement. But as we were working through funding all of our water infrastructure projects, what we started to discover is we have this chunk of federal money that can just be used for replacing the lead service lines and nothing else. And we started running out of money, whether it be loans or even grants, to fund the other part of those projects that those communities were applying for. So we don't have a whole lot of projects coming in where someone's just going down the street and replacing every lead service line and doing nothing else. You know, they want to do the right thing, which is you dig once, you replace that water main, you replace those associated pumps, that kind of thing. And so, you know, when we offer a community $2 million as part of a $10 million project just for their lead service lines, I mean, to be honest, the answer we're getting a lot of the time is that's not enough for me to go forward with that project. So we're trying to meet what communities are asking us for on this, and trying to fund that whole project in some way.
Okay, and then, so in providing this level of state funding, does that allow us to access the maximum amount of federal dollars that we would be eligible for?
Yeah, it's difficult to say 100%. So last year and every previous year, we've been allocating all of our lead service line dollars. But a big reason we were able to do that was the ARP dollars that the legislature did in Senate Bill 565. Those are all committed now. So we don't have those dollars at our fingertips. This will help get us there. So when we're talking 60 to $70 million for lead service line, a lot of times what we're seeing is projects, they run the gamut in terms of what portion's lead service line and what portion is like the water main. But, you know, if it's 50-50 split between this additional funding that we're asking for in the budget, our other loan dollars that we already have coming from EPA, coming from the budget, it's going to help get us much closer. And, you know, we try to focus on making sure we're pulling down every dollar possible, because not only do we want to make sure we're using all the dollars allocated to us, that also positions us to look at EPA and say, hey, Michigan's using all of that money that you're putting out there. I can promise you there are other states that are not. There are other states within Region 5 here that aren't doing it. So we're trying to position ourselves to be really ready to take more federal dollars when EPA makes that decision to reallocate other states' money.
Thank you.
While we're talking about the details of water infrastructure, I'd like to submit my own question, which is around the expiration of the Clean Water Revolving Fund bonds that are responsible for financing the maintenance, improvement, and replacement of major water infrastructure. Those bonds will be running out following the cessation of, certain federal funds. In addition to that, I am curious how the department plans to address the $19 billion backlog that we have in water infrastructure, maintenance, and replacement. I know that you have asked for $2 to $3 billion a year. Obviously, $40 million doesn't quite meet there. So tell us a little bit about that story and help us understand what the future holds in terms of our ability to draw down those federal funds and advance solutions for our communities.
Yeah, well, I'll start us, and Travis, you feel free to add on to it. But I would just say, first acknowledge what you're saying. This is a massive gap in the amount of funding that's needed over the long run. We've spent a lot of time with our friends at EPA making that clear as the standards change and as the bar is being raised in terms of lead service line replacement, drinking water compliance standards, all of that. That there are big funding gaps, and I think other states are doing that as well. We're at the same time we're looking at all options internally here that at our disposal, and we'll continue to do that. Do you have anything to add? I think that's all we can say right now.
Thank you for acknowledging that issue. Eyes wide open, right? Mm-hmm. Representative Brayback, and then we'll hear a final question after that from Vice Chair Beeson.
Your question was my question. So thank you for asking it.
Rep. Beeson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, guys, for being here. I got my glasses because turning 50, and I got to reading what I'm writing here. Director, thanks. Something that you said, who you're serving, issuing permits, easy to deal with, and then our governor this last week with her goal and the governor making it easy for departments, and Kyle Garant said that our goal is to serve the people, and this is my concern because I have a lot of cases, and some of the stakeholders are frustrated with the process and how it keeps changing, and this is a great year. I mean, it's not only for us here, it's an election year, but we can make the departments also be accountable because we have to answer to those stakeholders. And I got to tell you, I want to hear and I want to see your department work with the stakeholders that want to get these permits that are 3-4 years out. And I know that we put a lot of people in there last year and you talked about permits. So we got to make sure that we start doing this because some of these are just like right down to pavement are permitting, and they can't get it done. And we want to make sure that what you're telling us, that it's actually happening out there to the stakeholders at the line, because it matters whether it's my small business or these businesses. And what you're saying is like, we're customer service, and then what they're seeing on the field right now, because we do have a lot of new people in the field that are working with these people, and they're like, no, it's this way, and it's kind of creating a little bit of a rift with businesses, and I will talk to you more afterwards, but 3 years to get a permit, and it's not just your department. We need to make it so we're a lot faster, and Travis, I hope that you've been great to work with and numbers and get there, but I hope that we make it so that the stakeholders get those permits a lot faster with the amount of people that we put in place last year.
I really appreciate the question, Representative, and want to acknowledge the many challenges that exist in the permitting. These are complex issues. They do take time. Our team has done a fair amount of analysis in the past several months of some of the challenges that exist. Historically, there might have been optimizing cooperation across state agencies. There's staffing limits originally, and I think there's still a little bit of that. There were technology challenges too. We weren't all working off one database, and we had records that weren't digitized. So when you have to do the investigation to determine whether a permit can work or not, can be applied or not, some of that research took longer than it should have. And then, to be fair, I think externally in the regulated community, one of the things we found is that the front end of a lot of these permitting processes were where we lose a lot of time, often from us not getting involved early enough in the process, from us not there being a need for education just about what the regulations were and what the process were. So we've been trying to talk to the business community associations and groups to try to work on that one. There's a bunch of things that we've got in the works right now. I'll just share a couple of them with you. We've obviously increasing permitting capacity is a big part of it, because when somebody is doing permits, they're doing permitting, a little bit of enforcement, a little bit of outreach, a little bit of 6 or 7 things, and that was, I think, has been a little bit of the challenge. Some of these added FTEs, and especially if we can do what we've proposed in the budget here, should make a dent in that because it'll start to allow us to specialize a little bit, and you have the technical work of doing the permit, but you have the engagement and outreach that there weren't really people assigned to that, and we'll be able to do that. We're hiring a exec level position that is we're calling it a permit administrator, a bit of an ombudsman to help both keep the department on track in streamlining the process and making sure we're making progress and making good decisions, but also to be there on high profile or complex cases to make sure we move it through the system. We've done lean process improvements across a number of our permitting areas, and a lot of that's happened in the last year or so. So some of those improvements are just happening. We've added permit coordinators. And I think that the digitization and the streamlining of the IT aspect of it is a really big thing that's part of the budget as well.
So maybe then you will see some, like I would like to say it's like a fast track, something a little bit that moves our permits, whether it's with Eagle or businesses, because we lose out the longer permits, the longer it takes to get something done. And the next time that we get an estimate, it's substantially, a cost is almost like a third every time we push something out. One more year,
Totally
it comes back.
understand. Yeah, and sorry, one thing I wanted to go back to something, which is that just on this area of I mentioned education, but what we realize actually big time we're losing a lot of time in a lot of applications because we're not getting complete applications in. It's actually a much higher percentage of the delays than you might imagine. And that's as much on us as on anybody else to try to work on that. I'd be open to any ideas that you have.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that
We wanna
going
make it
forward,
work
we
for everybody.
grab everybody and bring them in and say, we want to work with you, get this done.
Yeah.
Fix the roads, fix the water. Like, we don't want to make it so hard, because sometimes that's stopping, and that's what people remember, that overwhelming feeling of like how hard it is to deal with the state. As a business owner, that was always a concern. It doesn't matter what department, and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's that.
Yeah.
And we need to feel like we're there to keep the business open, push things forward. So
Yeah. Appreciate that a lot, and always happy to talk about that.
thank you. Thank you.
Any final questions? Looks like we're all clear. Any final remarks or?
Thanks. No, thanks very much, Madam Chair and the members of the committee. Real privilege to be here with you, and thanks for all the great work you're doing for the state and the people here of the state.
Thank you, Director and Deputy Director. It is clear that a ship is turning, and we now have the people and the resources that we need to serve the state. We're very excited to watch you gain speed as you as you have all your shipmates on board, if you will, and we will see you again for another appropriations show next week. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, does she get a clip? Don't we get a? Are we not done?